The first thing I smelled wasn't comfort, it was betrayal. Fresh from heart surgery. I asked my son for a glass of water. His wife looked me in the eye and said, "We are not your servants. Justice doesn't always come from anger, it comes from the law. If you believe respect is earned, not demanded, share your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories move you, subscribe and join us in standing against betrayal." The first thing that hit me wasn't the familiar scent of my own home. It was the smell of roast turkey and rosemary. It was a smell that should have meant warmth, family, a welcome return. But today, it only made the fresh, angry, scar on my chest tighten. A cruel reminder of the heart they'd just finished putting back together. I stood in the doorway, the cheap hospital bag hanging limply from my hand, feeling like a stranger. My son, Brandon, and his wife, Ashley, were sprawled on the sofa I'd bought 20 years ago with my Sarah. The television was blaring some reality show where people screamed at each other over trivial things. They glanced up as I shuffled in. Brandon gave a short, tight nod. Ashley didn't even bother with that. Their eyes were back on the screen before I'd even closed the door behind me. The click of the lock sounded unnervingly final. "Hey, Dad," Brandon said, his voice distracted. "You made it." I made it, as if I'd just returned from a trip to the grocery store, not a 5-day stay in the cardiac ICU. I managed a weak nod myself, leaning against the wall for a moment to catch my breath. Every movement was a negotiation with pain. The doctors had given me a long list of instructions: no lifting, no stress, plenty of rest. They didn't have a pamphlet for what to do when your own son looks through you like you're made of glass. I made my way to the armchair in the corner, the one that had been my chair for decades, and lowered myself into it with a soft groan. The house was the same, but it wasn't. The photos of Sarah were still on the mantelpiece, but they seemed to be collecting a thin layer of dust. The air was thick with the smell of their dinner. A dinner they hadn't waited for me to join. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, so profound it felt like I was sinking through the floor. My throat was sandpaper. The hospital had kept me on a strict fluid regimen, and the habit of thirst was ingrained. I saw a half-empty pitcher of iced tea on the coffee table, just out of my reach. "Brandon," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It came out raspy, weak. Could you get me a glass of water?" Son. He didn't move. His eyes were glued to the television. Ashley, however, heard me. She shifted on the couch, turning her head just enough to fix me with a look of pure annoyance. It was a look I was becoming far too familiar with. "He's busy, David," she said, her voice sharp. I tried again, looking directly at my son. "Brandon, please. I'm very tired." He finally tore his gaze from the screen. Not at me, but at Ashley. He looked like a man asking for permission. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was then that she stood up, not to help, but to confront. She walked over and stood in front of me, her arms crossed. "We told you before you came home," she said, her voice low and cold. A stark contrast to the manufactured drama on the television. "We have our own lives. We have jobs. We are not your servants." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of broken glass. "Not your servants." The phrase echoed in the sudden, ringing silence in my head. I looked past her, to my son, my only child, who was now staring intently at his shoes. refusing to meet my eyes. His silence was his answer. It was a betrayal sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. A memory, warm and vivid, flooded my mind. A ghost from a better time. It was of Sarah. Her hair tied up in a bandana. A smudge of white paint on her nose. We were in this very room. The walls bare. The air smelling of sawdust and fresh paint. We were building this house, board by board, with our own hands. I remembered the day we signed the deed over to Brandon and Ashley. A gift after Sarah passed. It was her life insurance money that had paid off the last of the mortgage. It was meant to be a foundation for their future, a legacy of her love. "We'll take care of you, Dad," Brandon had said that day, his hand on my shoulder. "Always. This is your home, too." The memory faded, leaving the cold reality in its place. I pushed myself up from the chair, each muscle screaming in protest. My hand instinctively went to my chest, to the tender flesh over my broken ribs. Ashley watched my struggle with an unnerving stillness. Her expression unreadable. I didn't look at Brandon. I couldn't. I shuffled my way to the kitchen, my feet dragging on the hardwood floors I had laid myself. The scent of rosemary and garlic was overpowering here. On the counter sat the remnants of their feast, a half-carved turkey, roasted potatoes glistening with butter, a bowl of green beans, a king's meal. They hadn't even saved me a plate. My hand trembled as I reached for a glass in the cupboard. I filled it with tap water, the simple act feeling like a monumental task. I drank it down. The cool liquid, a small relief in the desert of my throat. Leaning against the counter, I looked back into the living room. They were laughing now, pointing at something on the screen. The moment of confrontation already forgotten, already dismissed. To them, I wasn't a father recovering from a life-threatening surgery. I was an inconvenience, a piece of furniture that had suddenly learned to talk. That night, I didn't sleep in the master bedroom. They had taken it over months ago. My room was the small office at the end of the hall, the one I had used for my accounting business before I retired. It was cramped, filled with old furniture and boxes of files. It smelled of dust and forgotten things. It felt appropriate. I couldn't sleep. The pain in my chest was a dull, constant throb. But it was nothing compared to the ache inside. I sat on the edge of the bed, the house silent around me for the first time. In the corner, under a stack of old magazines, was a small oak box, Sarah's memory box. My fingers traced the familiar grain of the wood. I opened it. Inside were old photographs, letters, her favorite seashell from our trip to the coast. The scent of her, faint and floral, rose from the box. And for a moment, the grief was so fresh it stole my breath. Tucked at the bottom, beneath a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon, was a thick, folded document. The original deed of gift for the house? I pulled it out. My fingers clumsy. I hadn't looked at it in years. It was just a formality, a piece of paper. But tonight, I needed to hold on to something tangible, a piece of the life that was. I unfolded the crisp pages, my eyes scanning the dense, legal text without really reading it. It was mostly jargon. Words like grantor and grantee, whereas and heretofore. And then, my eyes caught a phrase, a small, unassuming paragraph on the second page. A section I barely remembered our lawyer, Mr. Peterson, explaining all those years ago. It was titled, Covenant of Care. My breath hitched. I read the words slowly. Then again, to make sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. The language was formal, but the meaning was crystal clear. The transfer of the property was conditional. It was contingent upon the recipients, Brandon and Ashley, providing adequate care, comfort, and support for the grantor, me, for the remainder of my natural life. Should this covenant be breached, the deed would be rendered null and void, and ownership would revert back to me. My heart, my broken, stitched-up heart began to pound. It wasn't a painful, erratic beat like the ones that had sent me to the hospital. This was different. It was a steady, powerful rhythm, a drumbeat of possibility, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something harder, colder. My hand, shaking for an entirely new reason, reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in 5 years. The house was dark and silent. My son and his wife sleeping peacefully in the bed that Sarah and I once shared. They had no idea that the foundation of their comfortable world has just developed a crack. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before a familiar, professional voice answered. Peterson Law Office. I cleared my dry throat. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice quiet but firm. This is David. We need to talk about the house. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the rustle of paper. David. Mr. Peterson's voice was as calm and measured as I remembered. It's been a long time. I heard about your surgery. I hope you're recovering well. As well as can be expected, I said, keeping my voice low. Listen, I'm sorry to call so late, but I was looking at the deed of gift for the house. There's a clause in it, a covenant of care. Is that what I think it is? I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Yes, I remember it distinctly. Sarah was very insistent on it. It's an old-fashioned clause, but perfectly ironclad. It means exactly what it says. Why do you ask? David, is everything all right? His question was a lifeline, and for a second, I was tempted to pour out the whole sorry story. But I held back. This wasn't a social call. This was strategy. Let's just say circumstances have changed. I said, what would I need to do to enforce it? You'd need to prove a pattern of neglect or abuse, he said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional, a consistent failure to provide care. 1 or 2 instances won't be enough. A judge would need to see a clear and deliberate breach of the covenant. My advice: document everything. Dates, times, specific events, words spoken. Keep a log. The stronger your evidence, the stronger your case. We spoke for a few more minutes, and by the time I hung up, the cold resolve inside me had hardened into a plan. The next morning, I decided to conduct one final test, a last chance for my son to choose a side. I left the water pitcher by my bed empty. Around mid-morning, I saw Brandon walking down the hall toward the kitchen. Brandon, I called out, my voice steady. Could you fill this up for me when you have a second? He stopped in the doorway of my room, his hand on the frame. He looked at the empty pitcher. Then at me, for a flicker of a moment, I saw the boy I raised, a hint of conflict in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but then his gaze drifted past me. Down the hall, Ashley was standing there, by the living room, watching. She didn't say a word, just raised a single, questioning eyebrow. It was all it took. Brandon's shoulders slumped. He gave me a helpless shrug, mumbled something about being late for a call, and walked away. He didn't just walk away from me. He walked away from his last chance. That afternoon, while they were out, I went back to Sarah's memory box. I knew what I was looking for. Tucked away in a side pocket was a small Silva microcassette recorder. She'd used it for her freelance journalism work years ago. It was an antique by today's standards. But I found a pack of fresh batteries in the desk drawer, and when I pressed the record button, a tiny red light blinked to life. I slipped it into my shirt pocket. The weight of it, both a burden and a comfort. The first opportunity came that evening. Ashley came into my room without knocking. A stack of mail in her hand. She tossed it onto my desk. "These are more bills from the hospital," she said, her voice dripping with resentment. "Do you have any idea how much this is all costing us?" I didn't answer right away. I just let her talk, my thumb resting on the side of the recorder in my pocket, feeling for the small adrators. Raised button. I pressed it. "The insurance is covering the majority of it," I said calmly. "The majority isn't all of it." "David," she snapped. "There are co-pays, prescriptions. Things add up. We're not made of money." She went on for another minute, her complaints a litany of her own perceived hardships. I just listened, letting the tiny spools of the tape capture every venomous word. When she finally stormed out, I pressed the button again. The silence she left behind was deafening. In the days that followed, the neglect became more pronounced. They'd forget to bring me my lunch, leaving me to fend for myself with whatever I could find in the fridge, which was usually not much. The television in the living room would be left on at full volume late into the night, the sound echoing down the hall and making sleep impossible. They were building my case for me, one callous act at a time. One afternoon, I felt strong enough to walk outside for some fresh air. I was sitting on the porch swing, the gentle motion soothing, when I saw my neighbor, Linda, watering the petunias that lined her walkway. She was a kind woman, a widow like me, and had been friends with Sarah for years. She spotted me, and her face broke into a warm smile. "David, it's so good to see you out and about. How are you feeling?" "Getting there, Linda. One day at a time," I said. She came over to the railing, her expression turning more serious. "Listen, David, I don't want to pry, but is everything okay? I've seen Brandon and Ashley coming and going, and they don't seem like themselves lately. I hope they're taking good care of you." Her genuine concern was a stark contrast to the cold indifference inside. I chose my words carefully. "It's been an adjustment for all of us," I said, a masterpiece of understatement. But the look in my eyes must have told her more, because she nodded slowly, a sad understanding dawning on her face. "Well," she said softly, "if you ever need anything at all, you know where I am." That night, I knew I had to prepare for the storm. After they went to bed, I crept out to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and old wood. In the back corner, behind a stack of old tires, was a rusty metal cabinet. I pulled a small duffel bag from it and began to pack. A change of clothes, my checkbook, my passport, the spare phone I kept for emergencies, and Sarah's memory box. It was all I needed. I zipped the bag and tucked it away behind the tires, out of sight. I was just closing the cabinet door when my cell phone, the one in my pocket, buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Peterson. "Papers are ready. Let me know when you are. I was typing a reply when the door from the kitchen to the garage creaked open, flooding the space with light. Ashley stood there, silhouetted in the doorway. Her arms crossed. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing in the dim light, taking in the scene. My hand still on the cabinet, the faint smell of dust I'd kicked up. "What are you doing out here?" "David," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's the middle of the night." I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my breathing even. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice steady. "Thought I heard a noise." It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. Her eyes flickered from my face to the cabinet and back again. A seed of suspicion was planted. She didn't press the issue, just gave a dismissive sniff and went back inside, leaving me in the cold darkness of the garage. But I knew the clock was now ticking faster. The next morning, I waited until they were both in the kitchen, drinking their coffee. I had showered and dressed in a clean shirt and slacks, wanting to look them in the eye, not as a patient, but as the man who owned the ground they stood on. I walked into the room and placed a neatly folded copy of the deed of gift on the kitchen table between them. "I think you'll want to read this," I said. Brandon looked at the paper, then at me, confused. Ashley picked it up, her eyes scanning the first page with a bored expression. Then she flipped to the second page. I watched as her face changed. The boredom evaporated, replaced by disbelief. Then a flicker of panic. "What is this?" she said, though her tone told me she knew exactly what it was. "That," I said, my voice perfectly level, "is a legally binding contract, one that you have both breached. You have failed to provide the care and support stipulated in the covenant of care." I let the words sink in. "According to the law, and according to this document, your ownership of this house is now void. This is my house again." For a moment, there was only the sound of the coffee maker gurgling on the counter. Then Ashley let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "You're joking," she said, looking at Brandon for support. "He's lost his mind. The surgery has made him delusional." Brandon just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his face. "I assure you, I am perfectly sane," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "Milavier, Mr. Peterson, has already prepared the necessary paperwork. This is not a negotiation. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." The laughter died in Ashley's throat. The panic in her eyes flared into pure rage. "You can't do this," she shrieked, slamming the paper down on the table. "This is our home. We live here. You lived here." I corrected her gently. "Under conditions you failed to meet." Her face twisted into a mask of fury. She turned on Brandon. "Are you just going to stand there? Do something." Brandon finally snapped out of his stupor. He took a step toward me, his hands raised as if to placate a wild animal. "Dad, come on. Let's just calm down and talk about this. You're not well. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I said, "and there's nothing left to talk about." That's when they moved. It was fast. Ashley lunged for my phone on the kitchen counter, grabbing it before I could react. At the same time, Brandon took my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "We're not letting you do this." "Dad," he said, his voice strained, "you need to rest." They guided me, half pushing, half carrying, down the hall to my room. I didn't fight them. I knew it was pointless. They herded me into the small office, and I heard the click of the lock on the outside of the door. The sound was heavy. Final. "You can stay in there until you come to your senses," Ashley yelled through the door. I was a prisoner in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to their muffled, angry voices in the hallway. My first instinct was panic, a cold wave of it that made my chest tighten. They had my phone. They had me locked in. But then, I took a deep breath. This was a setback, not a defeat. They had made a critical error. They had locked me in the one room in the house that had a secret. I walked over to the window that looked out over the side yard, over Sarah's rose bushes. It was an old, double-hung window, and I knew from years of living here that the latch on the right side had always been loose. Sarah had always meant to have it fixed. I was suddenly very glad we never got around to it. I pushed on the frame. It didn't budge. He pushed harder, putting my shoulder into it, ignoring the sharp protest from my scar. There was a groan of old wood, and then a soft pop as the loose latch gave way. The window slid open a few inches. It was enough. Squeezing through the narrow opening was a painful, awkward process. My ribs screamed, and the thorns from Sarah's prize-winning rosebush snagged at my clothes, scratching my arms. But then my feet touched the soft grass. I was free. I didn't run. I walked, deliberately and calmly, around the front of the house and straight to Linda's front door. I must have been a sight. My clothes disheveled, fresh scratches on my hands. I pressed her doorbell, my heart hammering against my ribs. She opened the door, her friendly smile faltering as she took in my appearance. "David, good heavens. What happened to you?" "Linda," I said, my voice breathless but clear. "I need you to do me a favor. I need you to call 911. My son and his wife are holding me against my will." Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't hesitate. She ushered me inside and immediately picked up her phone. As I heard her relaying the information to the dispatcher, I used her phone to make a second call. "Mr. Peterson," I said when he answered. "It's time." They locked me in. 2 police cars pulled up within minutes, their lights flashing silently in the bright morning sun. I watched from Linda's window as 2 officers walked up to my front door. Brandon answered, Ashley right behind him. Their faces, a carefully constructed mask of concern. I saw Ashley gesturing, talking animatedly, probably spinning her tale about my post-surgery delusion. I walked out of Linda's house and approached them, the 2 officers turning to face me. "That's my father." "Officer," Ashley said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "He's very confused. He's been having episodes since his surgery. We're so worried about him." The younger officer looked from her to me, his expression uncertain. I ignored her completely and addressed him directly. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and steady. "My name is David. That is my house. These 2 individuals took my phone and locked me in my room against my will. I am not confused. I am the victim of unlawful imprisonment." "He's lying," Ashley insisted. "He doesn't know what he's saying." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The officers were caught in the middle. "A classic," he said. She said, "Domestic dispute." I knew this was the critical moment. "You don't have to take my word for it," I said, looking the officer in the eye. "Just do one thing for me. Call my lawyer. His name is Mr. Peterson. I have his number right here." Just as I said it, a sleek, black sedan pulled up to the curb behind the police cars. Mr. Peterson got out, a leather briefcase in his hand. He was a man who commanded respect, his suit immaculate, his expression serious. He walked straight up to the senior officer. "I am Mr. Peterson, David's legal counsel," he said, his voice cutting through the morning air. He opened his briefcase and produced a thick document with a blue cover sheet. He handed it not to my son or his wife, but directly to the officer. "And this," he said, "is a court-stamped order for my client to retake possession of his property, effective immediately." The officer took the document, his eyes scanning the official seal. Ashley's face, which had been a picture of manipulative concern, went completely white. The color drained from Brandon's as he stared at the papers, at the undeniable legal finality of it all. The game was over. The officer looked up from the document, his gaze settling on Ashley and Brandon. His expression was no longer uncertain. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "I think you two have some things you need to explain," he said, his voice flat. "And you should probably start calling someone to help you pack." The 72 hours that followed were the strangest, quietest days I had ever spent in that house. After the police left, having made it clear that the court order was not negotiable, a heavy silence fell. The shouting was over. The manipulation had failed. All that was left was the sound of a life being dismantled, the screech of packing tape being pulled from a roll, the hollow thud of cardboard boxes being assembled, the scrape of furniture being dragged across the floor. I didn't stay in the house with them. Mr. Peterson had advised against it. And frankly, I couldn't bear it. I stayed with Linda, who insisted, and spent the days sitting on her porch, watching the house I built as if it were a movie. I saw a U-Haul truck back into the driveway. I saw them carrying out lamps, chairs, boxes of clothes. They moved with a grim, exhausted efficiency. There was no more fight in them. On the morning of the third day, the truck was nearly full. I knew I had to go back. I walked across the lawn and sat in the old rocking chair on my porch. The one Sarah and I used to sit in on summer evenings. I just sat and watched. After a while, Brandon came out. He looked older, tired. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. He walked over and stood before me, his hands shoved in his pockets, unable to meet my eyes. Ashley watched from the doorway of the truck, her face a thundercloud of resentment. "Dad," he started, his voice cracking. He stopped, swallowed hard, and tried again. "Dad, I'm sorry." Tears started to well in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I let it all get away from me. I should have stood up for you. I should have been a better son. Mom would be so ashamed of me." He finally looked at me, his face a mess of regret and shame. He was waiting for something. Forgiveness, absolution, a word that would make it all okay. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had given my home to, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty sorrow. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only ashes. There were no words of comfort I could offer, no easy pardon that would mend what had been so thoroughly broken. So I said nothing. I just looked at him, and my silence was the answer. It was the consequence. He seemed to shrink under my gaze. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. nodded once. A final, defeated gesture, and turned away. Ashley said something sharp to him, and he climbed into the passenger seat of the truck. She got in the driver's side, slammed the door, and without a single glance in my direction, she drove away. I watched until the truck turned the corner at the end of the street and disappeared from view. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence. It was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was clean, empty. I walked back into my house. It felt cavernous, echoes of their presence still lingering in the air. I went to my room, my real room, the office, and found the small silver tape recorder in my shirt pocket where I'd left it. I took out the tiny cassette, the one with Ashley's venomous words trapped inside. For a moment, I thought about keeping it. A reminder, but I knew I wouldn't need one. I opened the recorder, took out the tape, and pulled the thin, brown ribbon out until it was a tangled mess in my hands. Then I dropped it in the trash. The war was over. I had no need for the weapons anymore. Slowly, I walked through the rooms. My footsteps echoed on the bare floors. I ran my hand along the wall in the living room, the one Sarah and I had painted that sunny afternoon. I went to the mantelpiece and picked up her picture. Wiping the thin layer of dust from the glass with my thumb, her smile was as bright as I remembered. I kept our home safe. Sarah, I whispered to the photograph, "It's ours again. You can rest easy now." I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water from the tap. I carried it back to the living room and sat in my armchair, the one that had always been mine. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was quiet. It was peaceful. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and the final, precious legacy of the woman I loved. And in the profound silence of that empty house, I finally felt a sense of peace.